There are a lot of ways to level up in Oblivion. With 21 different skills that can be structured into all manner of various builds, you may be wondering which of these are most worth using. Which skills should you specifically focus on leveling in order to achieve some truly game-breaking abilities? In this video, we'll be looking at the pros and cons of each, as well as quick ways to level them in order to figure out which is best. From the utterly useless to nerve-shatteringly brilliant. Let's get to it. Down at the bottom, security is a skill to help us with lockpicking, making tumblers move more slowly to speed up the whole process, and ensuring less of them fall should we make a mistake. Unfortunately, for security, it can be utterly trivialized by not one, but two different methods that we can easily use to pick or even bypass locks entirely in-game. Firstly, from level 10 onwards, we can complete Nocturnal's Daedric quest, getting the skeleton key as a reward. An unbreakable lockpick, effectively allowing us to spam auto-attempt for the rest of the game. The only time we'll lose it is if going to jail, in which case we'll be given instead one regular lockpick, where maybe this skill could be useful, though this can also be utterly trivialized as well. By leveling Alteration magic, we can instead unlock spells to cast on different level locks, and just instantly unlock doors and containers. I like to call it the Armourer spell, and given Alteration is a skill that can be leveled about as quick as you can spam casted spells, this can become available pretty much as early as you like, maybe even before level 10, where we get the skeleton key. Hence, any of the perks that would become useful as we level the security skill probably won't even get noticed by us. The only real thing to keep in mind with this one is if you are going for max level in the game across the board, you will eventually need to revert to lockpicking without the skeleton key, since having that equipped will cap this skill about 40 levels too early. But even then, you can hold off on that until a point in the game where lockpicks are so easy to obtain that again, a higher security skill in and of itself really doesn't matter, and you can simply then speed level this with the training chest obtained in Dunbarrow Cove, which immediately relocks after being picked. The other pretty much useless skill now is Speechcraft, the stat that determines our disposition towards people and ability to better persuade them. Now, don't get me wrong, this is again a very important mechanic, crucial in fact to gleaming certain information for specific quests, but like with security, leveling the skill itself really doesn't matter. The persuasion minigame that we can perform on pretty much all NPCs is an easy and somewhat quick means of raising disposition provided you know what you're doing, and are careful with what you say on each turn. You know, in this totally unhinged and bipolar way of speaking to people. Hey, you seem like a pretty intelligent viewer.
Don't try to manipulate me.
I have this really awesome channel showcasing all the latest Oblivion content. It's super successful and well loved.
Such adventures. How I envy you.
You better subscribe, or else bad things are gonna happen.
You win this one.
I'm kidding. It's all just one big joke, you see?
You think that's funny?
Totally unhinged way of speaking.
I'm not impressed.
And no matter where your Speechcraft is at, you can always just play a few rounds of this when high disposition is absolutely necessary. Inevitably, as you progress the game, completing more and more quests, you'll increase fame anyway, which also raises disposition with characters. And if you really do want to save time, then you can just resort to bribery, if you've an excess amount of gold. At level 50 Speechcraft, we do get a free wedge rotation for the minigame, which can save a little more time, but again is by no means a necessary thing to have. And if you want to just bypass the need to ever play this unhinged way of speaking speech game again, then like with security, we can just use magic instead. This time, it'll be a case of obtaining the charm spell from Illusion. And you can buy the novice level Captivate from the Breville Mages Guild, which when cast will raise disposition by 10. But now that we know the basic spell, you can just craft your own cheap and much more powerful version. Head to the spellmaking altar in Frostcrag Spire or the Arcane University and make a touch spell with this effect. Just amp the magnitude up to 100, and the duration only has to be like a couple seconds, given that entering dialogue effectively pauses the game anyway. With this, every NPC can be charmed immediately when you need them to be, and you can then further bypass any need for Speechcraft or the minigame. But if you do want to level this skill purely for the sake of leveling, then you can just spam play the minigame. that's about it. Though, do be warned, there are some NPCs who are so aggressive that they will actually attack us if our disposition with them falls to 0. Take for instance Ontus Fanin in the Imperial City. So actually, deliberately losing at this game can be used sometimes to aggro people in place of a frenzy spell. Moving on to the first of the 3 melee combat skills, hand-to-hand is obviously inferior to blade and blunt in almost every way. Whilst it's really awesome to have the option of simply making fists the only weapon you need in Oblivion, it is of course going to result in weaker hits than a sword or mace at equal level. Unlike weapons, our fists can't be enchanted, nor have poisons applied to them, nor do the level of our gauntlets improve fist damage in any way. The only improvements come from their hand-to-hand skill itself, or increasing the strength attributes. You can, however, enchant gauntlets to fortify hand-to-hand, which technically helps, but you can also do the same with any wearable item. And you can't enchant them with offensive effects like fire damage, the same as you can with normal weapons, making you significantly more limited in what a hand-to-hand build can do. If you do punch your way to level 50 hand-to-hand though, then you will unlock the somewhat useful ability for power attacks to potentially disarm opponents. This can level the playing field, or even shift it if you then start using a weapon, but you'll have to be very quick to react to this. Enemies will scramble immediately to pick up their dropped gear, making this more of a temporary stun a lot of the time. It's also entirely useless against foes that don't have weapons, of course, or magic users, so is situational at best. Hand-to-hand can also deal massive fatigue damage though, especially at higher levels, though you'll probably want to have a fatigue restoration spell on hand yourself, as all of these punches can be very tiring. It's definitely a fun role-playing skill, no doubt about that, but you are massively handicapped if you choose this over blade or blunts. It might be worth leveling to 50 for the disarm effect alone, though then there's the faff of initially having to fight enemies hand-to-hand every time you want to do that, and there are just better methods out there. Though leveling this one up is kind of an obvious technique, just punch people a lot, and in fact the guy we feed on in Deep Scorn Hollow is both immortal and unreactive, so can be used to infinitely level this skill. If that ever gets patched out, then I find punching your own Conjuration summons is also a sustainable and controlled way to do this too, which also levels Conjuration at the same time. Sitting up slightly higher than Speechcraft, but still pretty low, is the Mercantile skill. This dictates how much we buy and sell items for, mainly affecting how easy it is to make gold in-game, though some better items are also locked behind a higher Mercantile skill. So you will absolutely want to level this one as you play, but that's inevitably going to happen just at its own pace. This one levels up by selling things, with the experience gained being directly tied to the value of the sale we make. Earning more gold levels Mercantile more, eventually helping you to make yet more gold, which makes this an enjoyable and satisfying skill to level. And the unlocked merchant perks from this skill are all useful, starting with ignoring the item's condition before making every item tradable with every merchant. Then at 75, opening up the option to invest 500 gold in a shop. And essentially this value is the most a merchant will pay for a single item. So if we have something worth 5,000 gold and the merchant's max is 2k, then that's the best deal we're gonna get for it. But that can be raised to 2,500 by simply investing in the shop. That 500 gold can then immediately be made back by selling something off at its maximum value, with anything else we then sell of max value, thereafter just also selling for an additional 500. So this is definitely well worth doing if you have a lot of high value items to sell. And one of the best merchants in the game for this is a Dunmer named Nilfus Amelian in the Merchant's Inn of the Imperial City. The same guy that we buy Battlehorn Castle upgrades from. His gold pool can be raised to 3,000 and he has a good haggle rate. Though at master level, haggle rates don't really matter at all, as all items will buy and sell at their base cost. Whilst all of this is useful though, getting gold in the game is fairly straightforward, and past a certain point, there's not really a huge amount to buy anyway. All the player homes come to about 250k collectively, and that's probably the biggest expense. If you're speed leveling Alchemy as well, which is way higher up this list and is something you definitely want to do, then you're going to produce a lot of excess potions. These can then be sold to simply get rid of them and level Mercantile at the same time, though you'll probably find, simply through the process of doing that you don't really need any additional gold from further leveling this skill, hence its placement down here. Moving on to our first school of magic, the perks for all of these work in exactly the same way, with leveling them up unlocking the ability to cast higher level spells every 25 levels: Novice, Apprentice, Journeyman, Expert, and Master. So the Mysticism school is a mixed bag, kind of the more magical equivalent of Alteration, still influencing the physical world, but in a more mystical way. Problem with that being that it largely limits the effectiveness of many spells to only working against other spellcasters. Take for instance the Dispel spell, one of the main things that Mysticism does, which removes spell effects from a target, but not abilities, diseases, curses, or enchantments. So, if a mage casts a spell to weaken us, we can just remove that effect. But this is going to be mostly situational against spellcasters, and most of the negative effects are still going to just require potions or shrines. There's then Telekinesis, which is useful for perhaps arranging furniture or grabbing the odd faraway item, but doesn't exactly scream all-powerful hero. Spell Absorption is a cool concept, negating the effect of a spell thrown at us and recharging our magicka instead. However, this is again situational against spellcasters and only available at 75 Mysticism or above. Though this actual effect can be accessed much earlier in game if you just choose the Atronach sign at the start, getting a base 50% chance to absorb any given spell. Granted, that comes with the penalty of losing natural magicka regeneration, though it's still significantly better than this spell. With this version of the spell only actually going up to a 25% chance at master level 100 Mysticism. There's also just items you can wear, like the Spelldrinker Amulet, to achieve a much more powerful, permanent, and probably earlier version of this effect. Though granted, the spell can then also bring it even higher. The Clairvoyant spell can be useful if you're lost, I guess. I've never actually really needed to use it, besides which that's available immediately at just novice level. Detect Life can be helpful, especially when faced with invisible enemies, but again, we can get this on equipment permanently. You don't need this skill, though it's another one available at just novice level. Then there's Reflecting Spells, which is similar to Spell Absorption, though instead tailored to reflect a percentage of enemy damage back on them. Though this high level spell can also be beaten by high level gear, like the Mundane Ring, Spellbreaker, or the Ring of Sunfire, with gear being a much more effective way to raise that percentage. And seeing as you can't even custom enchant gear with this effect, there's less need even to unlock the spell. That then brings us to Soul Trap. Easily the most useful spell of this school, Soul Trap enables us to harvest enemy souls, and is absolutely crucial to keeping a steady supply of filled soul gems to enchant our gear. Without it, Azura's Star is practically useless, but together they're a crucial pairing for almost every build. Basic Soul Trap is available from 25 Mysticism though, and really that's all you need. The basic spell allows us to capture even the highest level souls, with better versions of the Soul Trap spell merely increasing the radius and duration of it. So really, whilst Mysticism has some interesting and fun things we can do with it, once hitting level 25, it's not really a crucial skill to level anymore. And aside from Soul Trap, that's probably gonna live on hotbar, the rest is just less important. But head over to Leowin's Mages Guild for anything you do need from this school, as they're the Mysticism specialists. Acrobatics, whilst not necessarily the most important skill to focus on leveling, is easily one of the most fun, namely affecting our ability to jump higher and negate fall damage. And I gotta tell you, at higher levels, this skill is utterly broken. In fact, it's one of the few skills you can level well beyond 100 and still see a major difference. Though to be fair, at that point, you can more or less parkour over everything you need to. The perks also add to our maneuverability, adding dodges at apprentice level, which honestly I never feel the need to use but are nice to have, especially for dodging arrows. And then at level 75, we can effectively gain the permanent ability to water walk, or rather water jump. Useful for crossing water quickly of course, but even better still, traversing over the lava pools and Oblivion gates and taking pretty much no damage, like an extreme hot potato. So don't get me wrong, I love acrobatics, but when it comes to making a powerful character, it's difficult to argue it as more important. It doesn't increase damage or protect us, say from falling, and it's not even the best for helping us get away. That's more the forte of athletics. I mean, maybe sometimes we could jump away more easily, but that's more situational to the terrain. And high speed is certainly even more liberating than high jumps. That said, the ability to leap off of dive rock, not only surviving but barely sustaining a scratch with high acrobatics, makes it still feel like a very broken mechanic. Though, considering I'd buffed the skill with a custom Fortify Acrobatics by 100 spell, I think that's just as much the achievement of restoration magic as it is the leveling of acrobatics itself, which of course can just be leveled up by jumping everywhere. Conjuration in Oblivion can be divided into 3 different effects. The main, of course, is summoning various creatures to serve as combat allies, with stronger ones only unlocking at higher levels. There's also bound armor and weapon summoning to equip you with Daedric-looking gear that weighs nothing, though that's far from amazing, and we'll go into why. Then, finally, the ability to incite undead to flee. That's one potentially useful at higher difficulties when overwhelmed by undead, but really, it's only going to be useful in undead dungeons, and personally I find spells that make enemies flee really just prolong an issue, or rob you of some combat experience. But the most annoying thing about Conjuration is getting it to level 25. Please let me know in the comments if I've missed a spell here, but I don't think there's actually any novice level summon spells. Generally, the quickest way to level magical skills is just to repeatedly cast appropriate self-targeting spells as many times as you can, with each leveling you up slightly. But the only things we can cast at novice level Conjuration are a few of the bound items or a weak turn undead spell, meaning we either need to go and find weak undead, or more simply need the patience to repeat cast the bound items. These can't be spam cast, and you'll have to wait for the effect to wear off before casting it again, so leveling Conjuration to 25 is a bit more of a faff than other schools. With that done though, we have a fairly decent school of magic. Back to the bound armor and weapons first. They are kind of useless, quite a bit less powerful than normal counterparts we can just obtain, and the spells wear off pretty quickly. Not to mention more important stuff like swords and bows can't even be cast until higher levels. And maybe if the overall carry weight in the game were lower, this could provide access to things we couldn't otherwise afford to carry, but generally bound gear is gonna be a step down from what you're already wearing, and it can't of course be enchanted. If you are gonna use it though for some sort of role-playing build, then do yourself a favor and make a custom spell that equips everything in one go. Else, you're going to be using your entire hotbar on this, or just spending your life in menus. As for the main use of Conjuration, which is of course summoning, this can be quite effective. A constantly respawnable combat companion that can serve as a decent distraction on the battlefield. They can also be attacked to level up other skills, though bear in mind they will fight back. What's more, once you can actually cast summon spells, this is one of the quickest skills to level. In Oblivion Remastered, magic levels faster by casting more expensive spells, and summons, as you can expect, cost quite a bit, given the need to only really cast them once per fight. But by boosting magical regeneration, namely with Alchemy, that can enable us to recast very quickly. At Apprentice level, we can summon the likes of scabs and zombies, but by the time you reach Master, it'll be liches and storm atronachs. A more useful school across the board than Mysticism, though Soul Trap alone I would say is still more important. But the Conjuration school as a whole sort of sits in its own little bubble. It's nice to have, but you don't really need summons, and maybe it's something of a roleplay choice in that regard. It also won't make you insanely powerful like some other skills higher up the list, only really boosting you by the power levels of the strongest thing you can summon. The Mages Guild and Coral are the Conjuration specialists, so you'll find most of the spells you'll be needing there. Okay, now this is starting to get more difficult. A lot of these skills have build-dependent importance, and honestly, not one of them, apart from maybe security and speechcraft, are entirely bad or useless. So just keep that in mind going forward, but now we have light armor. The idea behind light armor is to trade some base protection when compared to heavy for increased maneuverability overall. Problem being that in Oblivion Remastered especially, where sprinting is a thing and we can so easily level speed to an incredible degree, agree, the less cumbersome nature of light armor isn't as important. Now, obviously, total armor protection is going to vary from set to set, so let's compare some light and heavy armors of the same level. The late game Shivering Isle sets, which are probably the best we can get stats-wise overall, are comprised of the Perfect Madness heavy armor and Perfect Amber light armor. And looking at these as a player with the exact same points in both heavy and light armor is about 50% less protective than heavy. In fact, I should probably explain quickly what exactly armor rating is. So this little number in the bottom left corner of our inventory is our total armor rating, translating to a flat percentage reduction in damage that we'll take. If your armor rating is 50, for instance, then you'll take half as much damage. This does cap at 85 though, so it can't be utterly game-breaking. And the latest game armor sets even won't get you much beyond the 50 mark, but you can still very easily get this to 85 with shield spells or enchantments. So back to why light armor is worse. It is, by default, weaker than heavy, with the only benefit then being that we move notably better when wearing light armor. Heavy armor has this sluggish effect, which is very noticeable even with high speed, so the light armor perks will firstly slow its degradation, meaning we need less repair hammers all the time. Then at expert level, encumbrance for this is entirely removed, meaning our character can still move like they weren't wearing any armor at all. Then at master level 100, we gain a 50% extra protection when wearing exclusively light armor. So at level 100, we actually bring it up to the same armor rating level as heavy armor, though at the same time, max level heavy armor completely removes the encumbrance debuff as well. So in fact, max leveling both of these then just makes it a case of design preference. They're both practically identical by that point. So this really then has to be decided on how the two operate before reaching level 100. Again, heavy armor is simply better protection than this, and that's generally going to matter more in a fight than simply being nimble. Though even on that front, we can just move much more easily in heavy armor before reaching max level with some simple methods, but we'll explore those when we get to them. Athletics is the more important counterpart to acrobatics, namely affecting our speed when running, swimming, and sprinting, and is leveled up somewhat slowly by simply doing these things. It also, like acrobatics, benefits from scaling well beyond 100. In fact, it's actually crazy the insane speeds you can achieve in simply the vanilla version of this game by buffing athletics and the speed attribute together, though it does kind of make horses redundant somewhat, unfortunately. The perks for this skill are entirely to do with fatigue though, initially enabling it to regenerate normally when running, before moving into consuming less fatigue when sprinting. At master level, you'll be able to sprint endlessly, with fatigue then only really having bearing on the use of weapons, though given how long it takes to reach 100 in athletics, you'll more or less have to forego fast travel to hit that on a standard playthrough. And fatigue regenerates quickly enough anyway that it doesn't make an extraordinary amount of difference. So athletics sits kind of in the same boat as acrobatics. It's very nice to have at a higher level and can make running away from combat especially much easier, but it isn't fundamentally necessary to a powerful build. Besides which, it'll level up of its own accord without requiring the need for special attention. You could still put it as a major skill just for the sake of it if there's nothing better for your build, but again, like with acrobatics, getting it temporarily to a super high level past 100 is far more easily done with potions, spells, and even enchanted gear to fortify the skill, making for a truly Flash-like character that can speedrun regions with ease. Though it's definitely more useful to just passively have at a high level than acrobatics, given we need to travel more than we need to jump. And I suppose running at superhuman speeds could also be considered a game-breaking ability, but for what? It doesn't improve attack power or defense, and fast traveling does exist. I mean, if it didn't, then this would be significantly more useful, but as it stands, this sits in the same camp of nice to have as acrobatics, albeit higher. Another of the melee skills next. Blunt affects our damage with weapons like war axes, which technically has a blade, maces, battle axes, again bladed, and warhammers. And this skill more or less works in direct competition to the blade skill. Both of these are very similar in the sense we can poison, enchant, and improve our weapons, and both are of course leagues better than hand-to-hand for these reasons. Now there's plenty of tanky builds where a mace or warhammer is just gonna look cooler than a sword, and blunt is a perfectly viable and valuable skill to use if you want to play that way. In fact, for my later game, after leveling blade to 100, I even switched mainly over to blunt, just to gain some more levels from general combat. So I've had a good amount of time with each. The reason that blunt loses to blade, I think, comes down to the different perks. Blade is much more skewed towards compounding raw attack damage, and we'll look at how in its own chapter, whereas blunt is interestingly more about protecting you from further damage. At level 50, power attacks will grant you a 15% shield for 5 seconds, increasing to 30% for 10 seconds at the full level 100. This is basically an additional percentage tagged onto your armor rating for that time, and can certainly help you tank through combat better. But given that again, armor rating is still capped at 85%, this effect can be a lot less useful in the later game when we already have high armor. Bear in mind that leveling Alteration alongside this also gives access to very powerful shield spells that can also easily bring us to the 85 cap, and last for up to 2 minutes per cast, as a more effective alternative to this. And the level 75 perk then grants a 20% chance to silence an enemy on a power attack for 10 seconds, i.e. stop any spellcasters from casting spells in that time. And this can be a very effective defense against mages, which can stack well with the physical defense of shield, but it is a much more situational ability, and only useful against spellcasting foes. Now, don't get me wrong, the simple use of blunt weapons themselves can still be highly effective, and they generally deal more damage, albeit slower, than blades do, with power attacks especially being highly effective. So if you do want to use these in your build, then go for it, but it's just that blades on paper are slightly more effective. Sneaking is of course a crucial skill for the famed stealth archer build, or just any stealth in general, namely increasing our ability to remain undetected, pick pockets, and most importantly in this game, deal additional damage from stealth. Indeed, whilst being entirely undetectable is much more effective with just magic in Oblivion, it's important to level sneak to 25 especially to unlock 3 times damage with bows and a huge 8 times damage with daggers. At Journeyman, we'll also reduce the noise we make when moving, which can still be important as that won't necessarily be covered by our more effective stealth method, but the expert perk of hiding in bright environments isn't going to be as useful, with ignoring armor at level 100 obviously being good for attacking armored enemies. And if you want to speed level sneak, then there is a very easy and exploitative cheese for this, which simply involves going into a prison, crouching next to a prisoner, and spamming the E key repeatedly to pickpocket them. We don't need to take anything, not that we could anyway, simply entering their inventory repeatedly is enough to level the skill. Prisoners of course are already in prison, and apparently according to Cyrodiilic law, this doesn't go down as a crime. And I think especially if you are playing a Marksman build, it's tough to pass up that additional sneak multiplier. After all, you're at range anyway and probably undetected, so why not just crouch down and get 3 times more damage? It certainly explains the proclivity of the stealth archer build, and sneak is a core component to that. But given that daggers actually deal 8 times damage, then that makes for an even more effective build than the stealth archer. That is, provided we can get close enough and down foes quickly enough to avoid the detection and lose the stealth bonus. Though achieving that, especially at higher difficulties, is less down to sneak and more down to another skill, which we'll come to in a bit. The generally much more protective of the 2 armor types now. Heavy armor weighs more, obviously, protects better until reaching level 100 with both, and degrades a lot slower. You will not need to bring out the repair hammer nearly as much when wearing a set of this as you would light armor, though that's not necessarily a good thing if you're looking to speed level the Armourer skill, honestly. But it does mitigate the risk of being caught out at the end of a dungeon with no repair hammers, and it also means our armor armor will stay effective for longer, as the armor rating does actually continually degrade as the armor durability goes down. And looking at the perks for this skill, the first 3 are the same as light armor, affecting its speed of degradation. Once hitting expert though, the encumbrance debuff is halved, and master is removed entirely. And the encumbrance debuff is really the main drawback with choosing heavy over light. Fortunately, there's a really simple fix for this, using a skill that's very easy to level, and that's the feather spell from Alteration. Not only will it temporarily increase our total carrying capacity, it'll also make a clear physical difference to how quickly our character moves, making heavy armor feel no difference to light. At 100 Alteration, the Beast of Burden spell grants 250 more capacity for an insane 6 minutes, but we can get access to more basic versions of this spell from as early as 25 Alteration, which still lasts for a full 4 minutes. It's definitely more effective at higher levels, but still makes a difference straight away. And with that sorted, heavy armor offers much better protection earlier in game and at higher difficulty levels especially, which means it just makes much more sense to wear. It levels, of course, same as light armor by simply taking damage in it, and base ratings do improve with the skill. So if you're wanting to level this one a bit more speedily, then maybe just stand there with a healing spell in hand and let yourself get hit a few more times. This is, of course, an important skill to staying protected, but not a game-breaking one. Again, we can only mitigate damage by a maximum of 85%. So compared to some of the more god tier skills, heavy armor just isn't quite on that power level. Another skill that isn't game-breaking but is entirely necessary to focus on is Armourer. Essentially the effectiveness by which we can fix gear with repair hammers, Armourer is something you want to scale to at least 25 as soon as possible, to unlock the perk allowing us to repair magical items. It's really annoying having early game enchanted gear only for it then to break and be a right faff to repair. The option still exists to take it to a smith and pay them to do it for us, but in early game, where money is no doubt more scarce, this isn't an attractive option either. You're almost in this position where it's easier to just wear and use unenchanted gear to begin with, repairing that until unlocking the magic repair perk. And the main thing for this is just to have a lot of repair hammers on hand, as they break far more easily at lower levels. And in addition to just buying the things, they're actually also fairly common in standard loot containers around town. So make sure also to check barrels and crates wherever you go. Otherwise, this skill is just going to scale very naturally, as you're just sort of forced to repair gear over and over again. And the most useful later game perk for this unlocks at level 75, allowing you to now increase item durability to 125% for even more increased weapon damage and armor protection. This of course will then serve as an additional buff to armor, blade, blunt, and marksman skills, so it is definitely worth striving for this one as soon as you can get it. Again, making sure to always have repair hammers. And you can even temporarily pick up enemy gear as well and repair that to scale this skill even faster. The Dwemer Forge that we buy for Battlehorn Castle also increases Armourer by 15 points when standing next to it, so you can unlock this perk from as early as level 60, but only if you then keep traveling back to Battlehorn every time you want to repair your stuff for the next 15 levels. And at master level, repair hammers never break, so you only need to carry one after this, which is definitely efficient and saves on the encumbrance of carrying several, but really doesn't matter as much if you're just an organized player. So a crucial skill to level in early game, and a very useful one throughout, which can afford some nice buffs, but again, nothing quite game-breaking from this one. Up next we have Block, a skill that not only defines our effectiveness with shields, but also blocking with a standard weapon or even our fists. So this is a useful skill to improve our defense in effectively every melee build. It's also by far the most effective singular piece of equipment to bring up our armor rating. But again, at higher levels, you're still going to hit that cap of 85. So even with full armor and holding up a shield, you will still take 15% of the total attack damage, which at high higher difficulties is going to be noticeable. Also, blocking with a shield is a surefire way to quickly deplete our fatigue, though the effect of this does lessen significantly as we level the block skill, dropping by 25% at level 50, 50% at level 75, and finally a full 75% at level 100. But reducing damage is not all that blocking is good for. If used correctly, this can in fact make for one of the most effective methods of melee combat. See, enemies that hit your shield will be temporarily staggered, opening a window for you to perform a parry. In one-on-one combat, mastering this technique can make fights a lot more interesting, as opposed to, the simple hit each other until the weakest one dies that's standard with general melee weapons. Though you will definitely want some potions and spells on hand to keep that fatigue constantly restored, as being hit whilst blocking with an empty fatigue bar can actually massively stagger you. But that's still not all that we can achieve with blocking. As a little extra, hitting 75 in the block skill will also unlock Shield Bash. It's a pretty weak attack to begin with, much lower than Blade and Blunts, but at level 100, its damage increases by a huge 150%. Granted, it's still not going to be effective as blades or blunt weapons in terms of damage, but it does scale with the strength skill past 100, unlike Blade and Blunts, and can therefore become very powerful indeed if you buff that up with potions and spells. And it also just makes for a much more speedy counterattack when parrying. And unsurprisingly, a shield to the face can stagger even the largest enemies even further, making again for somewhat more interesting combat than the simple hack and slash. Again, it's not quite game breaking, at least not by itself, and it's perhaps less effective as a later game skill where 85 armor is very easy to achieve, but especially in the early to mid game, using a shield is one of the most effective ways to heavily protect yourself, and is also just quite a fun skill. Like with light and heavy armor, you can level it up somewhat quicker by just blocking more attacks, or eventually using Shield Bash. In fact, I'd possibly recommend seeking out training for this one from Lumgro Baros in the Coral Fighters Guild basements, as getting to that Shield Bash level really brings out the full effectiveness of this skill. Bear in mind you can only train 5 times per level though, so make sure to do it each time before leveling up. Alteration has a handful of very useful abilities. None of them are utterly game-breaking still, but they're more generally convenient ways to achieve effects that do render some of the lower skills entirely useless. For instance, lockpicking, as mentioned at the start. If you have maximum alteration, you never need to pick a lock again. You can simply make an open very hard lock spell and crack any door immediately. Granted, it'll take a while to advance to that level, but alteration, like all magic, is also incredibly easy to scale to wherever you need. Just drink a bunch of Restore Magicka potions and then spam cast the most expensive self-targeting spell of which you're capable. It's also just good for lower level locks earlier on, with a new tier of the spell becoming castable every 20 levels about. There's also water breathing and water walking. These aren't quite as useful given how easy it is to find enchanted gear with water breathing, and we can already jump across water with 75 acrobatics anyway. But having the spells does also unlock the custom enchantments. There's then the shield spell, one for physical damage, but also equivalent to block fire, frost, and shock, but again, these are all beholden to a cap of 85%. So you don't really need insanely powerful versions of these spells. That said, with a high alteration, you can craft a custom spell which by itself applies the full 85 armor, and it's about 160 magicka cost for a 1-minute duration. And doing this can entirely remove the need to wear any armor, provided you always remember to cast it. Certainly less convenient than just passively having armor on, but there's also actually a very small debuff in spell effectiveness that comes with wearing armor. For instance, casting this 30% shield spell in full heavy armor only improves my rating by 28 points, about 7% less than what it should, but casting with no armor on at all gets the full 30 points still. So technically, you may just be better off wearing normal clothes. Still scale with whatever enchantments you want, and simply casting High Shield at the start of combat. It's certainly more of a faff, and you don't look as cool doing it, and you do need to scale Alteration pretty much to the max to achieve this to begin with. But on paper, it's still the same level of protection, now with even more effective spellcasting as well. It also makes bound armor from the Conjuration school even more useless than it already was. Again though, the 85 armor cap prevents any sort of game breaking. Finally, with Alteration though, we have Feather and Burden, both opposite effects of essentially the same concept. Feather lessens encumbrance and is good to cast on ourselves, whilst Burden increases it and is good to cast on enemies. How good Burden is kind of debatable. Whilst it can temporarily slow enemies down, you could also in that time just pummel them with destruction magic. You'll also probably have high speed by the time the Burden spell is effective, so getting away from combat isn't a problem, making this a pretty niche negative spell effect. Feather, on the other hand, is brilliant, completely removing the negative effects of heavy armor, as already mentioned, but also just allowing us to carry more stuff at once, and bring back larger hauls from dungeons. In turn, probably increasing our wealth as well. Definitely a spell worth buying as soon as possible, with the Mages Guild in Shadenal, specializing in Alteration. Back to the Stealth Archer build for a second though, and its main power of course comes from the Marksman skill, which put simply increases our damage with bows. At level 25, we'll be able to aim endlessly without losing fatigue, very useful for stealthing through caves with an arrow always nocked. Then at level 50, we'll unlock the ability to zoom. Now, I don't find this one too useful in Oblivion. Arrow physics are fairly basic, and by the time you unlock this perk, you'll probably instinctually understand just how much arrows drop from different distances. The Expert and Master level perks, however, are what make Marksman more than just the ranged build skill, granting a 1 in 10 chance to paralyze a target with each hit at Expert level, increasing to 1 in every 4 hits at Master. It's basically a free paralyze enchantment on every bow, though an intermittent one that does never need recharging. It definitely makes Marksman a great deal more powerful across the board, though if you truly are going full Stealth Archer, then you won't really benefit from this effect quite as much. In fact, I found that sometimes enemies falling over and ragdolling to this effect actually meant I then missed my next hit. And if you're in full stealth mode, it's almost better that they remain upright to prevent us needing to readjust subsequent shots. But on the whole, random paralysis can definitely be welcome to slow down larger fights especially. And archery in general is one of the most fun ways to play Elder Scrolls games, with the accuracy required actually rewarding player skill more so than melee. It's also of course the best way to administer poisons from range, meaning it can in that case potentially surpass the power of more basic destruction magic, though that's just as much a credit to Alchemy as Marksman. Arrows are of course just as important as a bow with this skill, and at harder difficulties especially, you are going to go through a lot of them. Fortunately, we can retrieve any that we hit enemies with, but there'll inevitably always be some attrition thanks to arrows that go astray. So make sure to keep them stocked, and keep an eye out for archer enemies, as some of them carry a myriad of interesting arrows. In fact, the different enchanted arrow types that we can get serve to make Marksman builds even more interesting, though they can also be a pain to reliably replenish. We can buy some from Mellowin in Dunbarrow Cove, but they're expensive, and certainly a later game thing to buy in abundance. Nosing ahead in front of Marksman, the most effective type of physical weaponry in-game has got to be blades, namely daggers, which ties this heavily also to sneak builds, as well as short swords, long swords, and claymores. As I said back in the blunt chapter, there's nothing to stop you using blunt weapons instead if it fits the vibe of your build better, but the perks unlocked by leveling blade simply serve to increase overall damage, nothing more. At apprentice level, the effectiveness of power attacks are increased and weapons become more durable, no change there from the blunt skill, but once reaching Journeyman, rather than applying shield, blade power attacks will apply a 15% weakness to normal weapons for 5 seconds, meaning any subsequent hits in that time will deal that much more of a percentage in damage. If an attack was going to hit for 100 points, it'll now be 115. This then increases when reaching master level with blades to 30% for 10 seconds, meaning if we open a fight with a power attack, all follow-ups in the next 10 seconds seconds will deal 30% more damage. Blades also swing faster than blunt weapons, so that's going to mean more attacks total in that time. And additional power attacks, which are far more damaging anyway, will now be even more effective, given this operates on a percentage, and each power attack will also reset the timer. On top of all of this, once reaching level 75 in Blades, regular attacks also have a 20% chance to apply bleed for 3 seconds. This is as opposed to Blunt's silence effect, and where that was only useful against spellcasters, bleed is just even more additional blanket damage to everyone. Silence may actually be a bit more useful against the right opponents, but that's just the thing, it's more situational. And there's actually still nothing to stop you from switching over to a mace when in a den of necromancers, say. For the most part though, swords are going to be faster, and with the compounding damage effects, deal higher damage in the average scenario. This makes them the most effective form of melee combat on paper across the game's long run. But again, this is of course superseded by the type of build you want, and which you're going to find most enjoyable. Also, again, scaling Blade directly affects the damage dealt with daggers, and this can therefore scale insanely with our 8 times stealth damage multiplier. But neither of those actually mean anything if we can't constantly remain in stealth, bringing us on to the next skill. I may be overrating Illusion by placing it here, but the fact is that we're now getting into game-breaking territory, and in my eyes, any skill with the ability to break the game deserves a place higher than the ones that don't. But like all magic skills, Illusion does several things. The Charm spell, which we looked at right near the start of the video, utterly trivializes Speechcraft, giving us immediate and maximum disposition on commands. There's also a spell called Command, which can temporarily transform enemies into allies to fight alongside us, and this on higher difficulties can really tip the tide of a fight, and arguably even mitigates the need for Conjuration entirely. Though with that school we do have more of a choice over which ally to summon, and these two effects can actually stack for multiple allies at a time. It'll say in the custom menu that this only works on NPCs up to level 25, but actually, as long as this dial is set to 100% effectiveness, it should affect all enemies it's cast on, making this an extremely powerful, if expensive, max-leveled spell. But even at lower levels, it still has the same use, just not necessarily on everything. Calm is basically the same, just without the fighting for you parts, whilst Demoralize will instead cause enemies to flee, and Rally then does the opposite, on those rare occasions when they flee of their own accords. Then finally Frenzy will make them attack anything and everything. Basically, Illusion gives you so many ways to control the minds and thoughts of everyone else, and that's not even the best thing about this school. In fact, to be honest, I tend to prefer fighting normally over this complex system, but it is there, and it is very powerful. The Silent spell also exists in Illusion, easily the most controlled and reliable way to stop other spellcasters, whilst Night Eye is an ugly but practical way to see in the dark, and Candlelight serves as the best form of illumination in-game. Well, maybe alongside Vala and Welkin stones. And it's actually pretty important in the Unreal Engine ports, as dynamic lighting has left a lot of places feeling pretty dark. And bear in mind, once you have and can cast all of these spells, you can also apply them to a lesser degree as enchantments on gear. That is, except for Paralyze. Now, weapons do exist in the game with this enchantment, notably Volendrung, but we can also just have it as a spell to pause fights in emergencies. Though the most game-breaking spell from this school, which I'm trying to get to, well, actually, first off, there's still Invisibility for earlier game, a spell rendering us totally undetectable, though one that is cancelled if we attack, talk, or interact with anything. But wouldn't it be broken if we had this effect, this invisibility effect, but it remained active even if we did interact with stuff? Yeah, that's Chameleon. Usually, it's only a partial concealment, helping us to sneak better, but not rendering us totally invisible. However, getting the Chameleon effect to 100%, which really isn't that difficult to do, means we can attack and pickpocket as much as we please, and nobody will ever react. It can basically make every attack a sneak attack, and render even Master difficulty a complete walk in the park. You'll have to be level 50 Illusion to unlock the base version of this spell, after which though, you could simply enchant enough gear with Chameleon to render you 100% invisible. Though I found the most effective method is simply to wear Meridia's Ring of Khajiit, one of the many Daedric artifacts, all of which you can learn about in my Daedric Artifacts Ranked video, and this powerful ring grants an initial 35% Chameleon. We can then craft a custom spell for just the additional 65% we need, though do bear in mind, if you're wearing any armor, you might want to take it up to 70 to cancel out the reduction in spell effectiveness. You'll then want to drag the duration slider up as high as you can afford. For me, it was 75 seconds, and now just wear the ring, keep the spell effect active, and go do 8 times damage on everyone with Maroon's Razor. You can also do the pickpocket sneak cheese on literally anyone with this effect to level sneak to 100, with which those stealth attacks will also completely ignore enemy armor, and work even quicker. It completely trivializes everything and removes all challenge and therefore fun. Yeah, 100% Chameleon is quite simply too good to use all the time. Maybe if the AI were programmed better, like if enemies still reacted to being hit and maybe flailed around aimlessly, it'd perhaps be more balanced. But as it stands, this is stupidly broken. Still, weeding out game-breaking skills is partly the whole point of the back end of this video, and to be fair to Illusion, it has still got a strong roster of spells across the board. Even the basic ones like Light are just a utility I use all the time. And head to the Breville Mages Guild to pick up most of the spells for this one. Sitting as the most effective way of directly dealing damage in-game, we have Destruction Magic. Unsurprisingly, the magic score responsible for dealing damage directly is also capable of being completely exploited. The main method here involves chaining weakness to element spells before following up with the corresponding elemental attack. For instance, hitting an enemy with a 25% weakness to fire spell will mean any follow-up fire attacks will be 25% stronger whilst the weakness spell is active. It's gonna take more time and cost more magicka of course than just using the initial fire spell to begin with, and it relies on scoring 2 perfect hits in a row, not just 1. And sometimes enemies can cast summons that get in the way, or they'll just dodge at the last second. We can actually make this 10 times easier by combining with the Chameleon method so that enemies don't attack us, to create the ultimate speediest and least challenging way to clear dungeons. And whether you choose to do that or actually employ some skill still though, the true power of Destruction Magic comes from the chaining of weakness attacks. You can make a custom spell in Frostcrag Spire to deal 100% elemental weakness for a short time. You can also combine multiple elements into a single spell to increase enemy susceptibility to fire, frost, shock, and magic all in one go for a flat 10 seconds. We can then create a second spell, hitting enemies for 25 damage each of fire, frost, and shock, as well as draining health across 2 seconds each. Casting the first, then spamming the second will ensure our elemental damage spell does double the damage. Or actually, because it's weakness to magic and each of the elements, the effects each get doubled twice over, meaning instead quadruple damage from each of the magical effects. And because we've mixed all 3 of these together into one spell, it should be useful against just about everyone, even those with resistances to one of these, like Atrinox. This already makes Destruction insanely powerful, but we can take it even further by creating a second weakness spell, identical to the first but under a different name like Ultimate Weakness 2. We can then cast 2 weakness spells before following up with our elemental attack. This will multiply the overall effectiveness of our attacks once again, which can potentially one-hit enemies with the final spell even on Master difficulty. And yes, stacking a third identical weakness spell does compound this even further if you need it to. Like I say, it's the #1 way to achieve insane raw damage in game. Though of course, the most powerful spells we need for this do require a hefty amount of magicka and super speedy magicka regen, and that's where both of the next skills come in. A couple more things on Destruction though. This is specialized in by the Mages Guild in Skingrat, so head there for tomes. And in terms of leveling this skill to 100, it's really just a case of casting Destruction spells at appropriate targets. Even if you can't chain the stupidly powerful spells yet, you can still start with basic weakness and attack chains. Though bear in mind mind, the weakness spell always needs to be cast separately beforehand though, so don't bother trying to combine weakness and main attacks into one spell. It doesn't really work. Also, focusing on lower damage spells that work over a longer duration can be cheaper in terms of magicka, and it's usually better to cast multiple cheaper spells than just a couple of expensive ones. But again, that's not really gonna matter as much at higher levels, once we've scaled these final two skills. Now, alchemy can truly become broken in Oblivion. Our ability to custom brew all manner of various potions and poisons can massively enhance our damage from the likes of bows, bladed and blunt weapons, but more importantly, potion effects can completely trivialize things like magicka, health, and fatigue regeneration, as well as buff your character in many other ways, stacking in addition to the fortify attributes and fortify skill spells, which we'll get to in the next chapter. 2 high-level restore magicka potions, for instance, which function over a duration, continually restoring it over that time, can make our magicka regen insanely fast. Perfect for spam casting expensive destruction spells, or any expensive spells for that matter. In Oblivion, alchemy can be started quite simply with just a mortar and pestle. These come in 5 qualities, which you'll find on a leveled basis, and aren't at all gated by the alchemy skill. You can, in theory, use a master mortar and pestle with a very low alchemy, if you can find one. And by itself, you can brew potions with just a mortar and pestle. Combining 2 ingredients with matching properties will apply all the effects that match to a potion, or if it's purely negative effects, then a poison. Though to get truly broken potions is gonna require other alchemical equipment. So let's look at an example with this. Combining stinkhorn caps with void salts can be done to make a restore magicka potion, but since both of these ingredients also damage health, we'll also be stuck with that negative effect. With a master level mortar and pestle, combined with my alchemy skill, providing 8 points of magicka regen per second over a 33-second duration. Already, this is pretty good, but if we then brew the potion with a master retort too, it'll enhance just the positive effects, improving the potency by a third and doubling the duration. If we then throw a master calcinator into the mix as well, that'll double this potency again to 24 points now, whilst also increasing the duration by a further small 15%. Though, the calcinator will also improve the damage health effects, something we don't of course want when we're going to be drinking the potion. This is where the alembic comes in. This piece of equipment can take any negative effect from a potion and massively decrease it, in this case to the lowest possible values of 1 point over 1 second, practically making it nil. Not always needed if you choose your ingredients carefully, but good to have too. Also, when brewing poisons, you seemingly only need the mortar and pestle and calcinator, as retorts only boost positive effects, and alembics do usefully not reduce negative effects when brewing poisons, but they don't really do anything useful to help here either. But with a full set of alchemy equipment in this instance, our restore magicka potion is now 3 times more powerful per second and lasts almost 2.4 times as long, making it about 7 times more powerful overall. That's just one example. There are so many effects we can achieve with alchemy. Then you've also got to consider the perks. Initially, we can only imbibe 4 different potions at once, but already that's pretty decent. Stacking 4 of those restore magicka potions we just made is gonna regen almost 100 extra magicka per second for the next 78 seconds, for instance. At journeyman level 50, this then gets boosted to 6 active potion effects, and at master, an insane 10, leaving the door open to have a lot of effects active at once. So for instance, mass brewing restore health and magicka potions, then continually popping them throughout fights, can make your magicka and health regen so fast that you just can't run out of spells nor die. Or you could fortify any of the attributes too to achieve insane speed, for instance. And leveling alchemy also enables us to recognize even more potion effects, with all 4 being discovered at level 75. This makes brewing significantly easier, as our combinations available from our pool of ingredients become exponentially wider. Then throw in a 25% chance to craft an additional potion at apprentice, which becomes certain at experts, and once again the power of alchemy has doubled, halving the ingredients we need. It also just straight up means more money, because we'll be selling off double the produce. Then once reaching level 100, we need literally just 1 ingredient for brewing, with the first of the 4 effects always being taken. So you can then just farm or buy the one ingredient you need for any desired effect. The only thing about alchemy is it is very much a side activity. You will have to actively set aside time in order to level it, which is done, of course, simply by brewing. And the best place to do this, until reaching level 85, is Frostcrag Spire. Not just for the replenishing garden of ingredients, but also this table. When standing here, alchemy will be boosted by 15, giving earlier access to more alchemical properties. Just do bear in mind that once reaching standard level 85, standing here won't level you any further, since this table will then be pushing you to the maximum level 100. But overall, on higher difficulties especially, the buffs granted by alchemy will absolutely be crucial to staying alive, with again the effects of stacking restore health and magicka being a fundamentally important baseline. But there's plenty more stuff like feather, reflect damage, shields, fortify attributes, and much more I've already praised from the various schools of magic. And I'd love to go into even more details on alchemy, but maybe for a video where it isn't one of 21 chapters. Restoration is a perfectly valid school of magic, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There's a lot of crossover between Restoration and Alchemy, but Restoration noses into first place just about, I think, thanks to the insanely broken Fortify attributes and Fortify skill spells, with the skills at least not being fortifiable through Alchemy. It's also significantly more convenient, once you have a good Restoration spell, to just repeatedly cast that, rather than having to keep sourcing ingredients and brewing potions. So healing spells are the very most basic part of Restoration magic. Useful, for sure, and definitely the quickest, most convenient way to heal in a pinch, and we can also acquire or craft spells that restore health and fatigue together to support a melee warrior kind of build. Blocking and shield bashing especially consume quite a bit of fatigue, so this is good to have. And restore spells are probably the flagship of Restoration. The only thing we can't do is straight up restore magicka. It's not that overtly broken. We can fortify the willpower attribute though, to achieve basically the same effect by just buffing our magicka regen. We can also fortify our intelligence or fortify our magicka to increase our overall magicka pool and cast spells that are even more powerful still. We can custom craft fortify skill and attribute spells that provide a buff of up to 100 points. They can also last up to 2 minutes if you can afford to cast them at that level. Though you can of course just afford to cast anything if you simply buff up your intelligence or magicka by enough points first, and then buff yourself with magicka regen too. But here's where Restoration really breaks. Remember the technique from the Destruction chapter of crafting identical spells with different names in order to stack the same effects? We can do the same with Fortify spells. So, to show you an example, I crafted 8 identical spells to fortify speed by 100 points each for 45 seconds. We could have taken it up to the full 2 minutes if I'd buffed intelligence beforehand, but let's just keep it nice and simple here. 8 identical speed spells slotted onto my hotbar, then with just 2 restore magicka potions crafted with high alchemy, my magicka regens almost instantly, allowing me to chain cast these 8 spells in a row to buff my speed from 100 all the way up to 900. The results of course were utter insanity. I promise you that this is not sped up, this video is playing at regular speed, and we can also combine this with the water jumping perk from Acrobatics to literally remove the need for fast travel from the game. Yeah, this is just one of the crazy things you can do by exploiting Restoration magic, and given that you can chain buff any attribute or skill with this, it effectively serves as the most effective means to boost every single other skill. Granted, many of the skills especially don't benefit at all after going past 100, but the ones that do more than make up for it. And even earlier on in the game, playing in a much more tame fashion, just having a healing spell on hand or maybe some skill buffs is one of the absolute biggest lifesavers. There's very little we can't do as a strong Restoration mage, and given how overtly powerful and broken it is, it sits even above Alchemy at the top of the list, with basic spells for this one being mostly available at the guild in Anvil. But let me know in the comments whether you agree with this, if there's any more important details to certain skills that I've missed, and what your favourite skills are in Oblivion and why. I really didn't expect, when starting this video, just how game-breaking some of these would turn out to be, and I definitely want to look at those in more detail in a future video. So be sure to subscribe for that, and as always, a massive thank you to the patrons for going the extra mile to support the channel. You can find more on that in the description. Thank you for watching, I'm Sam Bram, and I'll see you in the next one.